Welcome to the Samson Strength Coach Collective. On today's episode, we have Emily Wright, certified mental performance consultant and owner and founder of the Wright Mindset LLC. Obviously, as a mental performance consultant, Emily dives into the world of sports psych, something that's very near and dear to my heart. So I was really glad to be able to speak with her, but then, talk about different misconceptions potentially athletes or strength coaches may have about sports psych and working with mental performance consultants. And then we dive into the topic of mental toughness at the end as well. I think it was a really great conversation for me because it linked together a lot of things that is really, truly the missing link. Mental performance and the sports psych side of things are what can really help elevate an athlete's game. And so I thought it was great to dive into this world just a little bit more and see her perspectives on how to work with athletes. As always, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy. What's going on, Samson Strength Coach Collective listeners? On today's episode, we have Dr. Emily Wright, founder of the Wright Mindset LLC. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much, Connor, for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you today.
Absolutely. I'm very excited as well. Dr. Emily Wright is a certified mental performance consultant, CMPC, and I think it's really exciting for us to be able to talk, right? Because part of this podcast and the hope is to be able to talk with other professionals within the sports performance team, and understand how we can all work together and best support each other as well too. I think when strength and conditioning silos itself from athletic training, from dietetics, from the sports psychology side, I think it can get really not productive. It can ruin the athlete's progress. So I'm really excited to kind of dive into your world and understand how to work best with you as strength coaches today.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited too. I totally agree. I think there's so much overlap between our fields, and it makes so much more sense just to collaborate when we can, because that's going to better the athlete. So for sure.
Absolutely. And right. And if we care about the athlete, that's kind of the whole goal, right? Is to make sure that they're getting really good holistic care. And it's interesting, before we even get into your background, one of the things that you just mentioned that makes me think of a Zoom we had last night. And I was talking with basketball coaches,
Mhm.
and they were talking about how ultimately the relationship between strength coaches and sport coaches, it's almost like the basketball coaches, they all agree that they see it as, okay, strength and conditioning is getting done. Like it's in a
Mhm.
good spot. I'm happy with it,
Yeah.
so ultimately we won't really collaborate a ton on the culture aspect.
Mhm.
And then I kind of told them like, yeah, I understand that, and I think coaches try to be respectful and they try to say, okay, well,
Mhm.
we're not going to tell you what to do within
Yeah.
the weight room specifically. But then the overlap that we're missing is that I'm not going to tell you about your practice plans or, should we focus more on defense or offense
Mhm.
today, but we all are in the development of the culture of the team,
Mhm.
and then the development of the character of each of the individual athletes. And it's the same across the board for all of us sports professionals, right? It'd be the same for you. I would never tell you exactly what techniques to use, but
Yeah.
at the same time, you're responsible for our culture development and the development of the athletes too. So that's the key link between all of us, I believe.
I agree. It's all important. We're all important pieces of the puzzle. So I always say that, like, that's part of the process. And then when you can put them together, it usually results in good things. So,
Absolutely. Was the quote from the NASA janitor? His job is to put a man on the moon, right?
yeah.
It's all
Yeah.
it's all important
Exactly.
pieces of the puzzle. Well, can you just take us through your background, and then what's brought you to your adventure with the right mindset?
Yeah, I can definitely. It's been a long journey. I could say that. So my background is in sports psychology. I have a PhD in sports psychology. So I got that from Michigan State University in May of 2021. If I guess, go backwards a little bit, I'm a big sports fan. I loved playing sports growing up. I did pretty much everything you could do sports wise, multi sport athlete, ran track, cross country, played basketball, soccer, I did karate, loved all the sports. For me, I did everything extra that you could do to be a really good athlete physically, right? Like my dad had me, I was working with private coaches, I was doing travel ball, I was doing my high school sports. And for whatever reason, I was a good athlete, but it was never like, I guess, what I expected I should be based on how much time and energy and sacrifice I was putting into training. And my coaches would tell me the same thing. They just, whenever I would struggle in a race or, I wasn't playing that well on the basketball court, they'd just be like, go practice more. Just go train more, go get more shots up, go get more reps, go for another run. And I always did those things, but the result was never there. So I really struggled just with my high school sport experience in that sense. So then I guess fast forward, I get to college and I go to Penn State. So I'm originally from Pennsylvania. I went to Penn State and I had an undergrad where I was doing my undergrad degree in psychology. And then I decided I wanted to minor in kinesiology. I had no idea that sports psychology existed truly. No one ever talked to me about it. I didn't know it was a thing. I saw a class in the kinesiology department. It was sports psychology. It was an intro course. So I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. I like sports. And, with my path, I knew I wanted to do something working with people. So I was like, I'll take that class. It sounds fun. Ended up loving it. And also, I think it really informed my own high school sport experience because as I was learning about these topics, and I was like, confidence, believing in yourself, and, being able to focus in the moment and not worrying about the past or other distractions. And I was kind of thinking to myself, wow, I really struggled with a lot of these areas in my high school sport experience, but nobody ever said anything to me. I didn't know it was a thing. So, anyways, that's kind of what led me down that path. Once I took that class, I was like, oh my gosh, like I want to do that for a living. Like I think that would be really cool to be able to support athletes in that context, right? To maybe just give back in a way that, again, I think I was missing that in my sport experience. So to be able to give back to athletes now, and help support them through that mental game journey. That was really important to me. So, anyways, I decided to pursue that. I went to Miami, Ohio for my master's degree in sports psychology, and then I said, "Oh, I'll keep going," because I thought teaching would be kind of cool. So I was like, "I'll do my PhD. I think that'd be fun." So I spent another 4 years at Michigan State, and then that's kind of led me to my just my role now as a mental performance coach and startup of my business and all that good stuff. So that's like I guess short story version of how I got here.
Yes, condensing a PhD into 4 years, just saying like I did my PhD in 4 years is always, way different than actually experiencing the 4 years.
That's a great point. Yeah, I was in school for like I guess undergrad, master's, PhD, 10 years, and yeah, in the moment it's a lot, but
Yeah.
it definitely was worth it. So I'm glad I did it.
I'll never forget my oldest sister. I started. I mean, I think when I was aware of what her schooling even was, she's a
Yeah.
professor in writing, and that I think
Oh,
I
nice.
was in
Yeah.
like sixth grade, and then by the time I graduated, she was still, going through her doctorate, and it just cracks
Oh,
me up because it's a long process. I mean, it's brutal, but well worth it.
for sure. Yeah, it's a long time. It takes a while.
Sorry to bring up bad memories potentially, but that's what's so interesting to me about sports psych is exactly what you mentioned. It's almost like I kind of see it as the missing link. It's something that's not
Mhm,
really talked about a ton. I was
mhm.
even, this is going to be the lamest example possible, but my fiance and I were playing pickleball a couple weeks ago,
Yeah,
right?
love
And
it.
we were just talking afterwards after we were driving home, just talking about, she was. Up, I think like 7-2 or whatever. And then I came back and
Mhm,
won it. And then she always talked about how in high school tennis, anytime she would start to lose, that's when she would 100% lose. There was no coming back from, she would have
mhm,
to be dominant so
mhm,
much so that she would, win all sets and then be able to progress. And then I thought back to my high school career, track and field. In shot put, I could throw a specific number in practice. And then once I got to meets, I would, usually be about 5 to 6 feet under where I typically
mhm.
was.
Yeah.
And so it felt like to me, like, okay, the answer to this is really just to try to throw so far that when
Uh-huh.
I'm 5 to 6 feet under, I'll still be able to win with that, number that I'm getting at meets. But then I never really understood the mental aspect behind it. And the same for my
Mhm.
fiance, that there's something that you can unlock that really would have, I mean, changed your game because it would
Mhm.
allow you to do things like come back from when you're down and not going inward and not essentially losing what talents and skills you have because you're kind of
Mhm.
losing it to the mental piece. And the same with me. And so I
Yeah.
thought that was just the most interesting part of sports psych is that it's something that's not very talked about.
Mhm.
What are some things that you think would help progress the field so that more people are aware of it? One, for professionals who want to get into sports psych, and then two,
Yeah.
for athletes who can use it.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's a piece of the puzzle, right? And sometimes for a lot of athletes, and I'd say maybe not even just sometimes, probably the majority of athletes, it is the missing piece. So I think just big picture, it's recognizing, and this is to me like where I always start when I'm working with athletes, but it's recognizing like this foundational idea that your thoughts have an impact on performance. Again, in I guess in conversation, that sounds pretty straightforward, and people are usually like, or athletes I work with are like, well, yeah, duh, like I get that, like how I think is going to impact things like how I play. But it becomes so much more difficult or different when you're actually put in that scenario, like you described, like, okay, you're down in the tennis match, or, you tend to play better in practice than you perform in a tournament or, a high stakes situation. So I think it's recognizing, yes, the way you think is going to impact how you feel. And I don't mean like, I mean, it could be feelings like you're excited or you're sad or you're angry, but I'm thinking more so like our mental performance attributes. So like how you think is going to impact your confidence levels, or it's going to impact your focus, your ability to focus, or how nervous or not you are, which then leads to things like, you're going to be impacted physically out there. So then maybe you're more tense when you're less confident and more nervous, tense, tight, not calm and relaxed. And that in turn is going to impact how you play. So it's kind of learning, again, I think understanding that first and then being able to recognize, okay, for me as an athlete, this obviously looks different from athlete to athlete. What are those mental performance attributes that I really could benefit from working on, right? And enhancing. So that could be, like I said, confidence, focus, optimism, handling pressure, perfectionism, fear of failure, right? The list goes on and on. But it's once you identify those, then you can apply the skills and strategies or learn those skills and strategies that are going to help you in those moments that you've described here.
Yeah, and I guess my follow-up question would be, do you think that every athlete should work with a CNPC?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think, and you know what, I recognize too, it's not always feasible, or like, I know that, like, if I think of like an athletic department, that's not always, now we're moving in that direction. I think we're starting to see more people get hired. But if you have the opportunity, 100%, I would say work with them. And it's not even just for, I always tell my athletes this, it's not even just for like the sport for performance piece. Obviously that's what we're trying to do and we're trying to enhance, but big picture, those are life skills. So, beyond the realm of sport, you're going to want to have those life skills, like being able to be confident in a job interview, or learning how to focus when you're taking an exam, if I'm working with a high school athlete or younger. So to me, the bigger picture is like you're going to have a toolbox of skills and strategies that are going to be applicable to you and your sport. But big picture, you're going to be able to transfer those to other areas of your life, and you carry those with you, and you'll need them. So I think that to me is, if anybody has the chance to work with an MPC, for sure. Like I think that's a no brainer.
Well, you bring up such a great point because I think about with my own experience. Obviously, I did not succeed enough to be a collegiate athlete, so
Me
I
either.
never, yeah, I was never able to really use these techniques. But then I think about the life skills, and after I learned these techniques with
Hmm.
my master's education, I use those all the time. I mean, every single day. When we talk about job interviews, I remember interviewing for a job that I was terrified for, and I was way too young to even interview for it. But I remember telling myself like the job's already mine, and
Hmm.
the confidence in using those techniques, and then the cognitive behavioral approach of your thoughts become your beliefs, which become your actions. That's, I mean,
Hmm.
endless in our household. My fiance is sick of me saying it, right? And then
Yeah.
sometimes she'll turn it right back on me. But they are life skills. These are things that you can use on a daily basis, and I think they've really afforded me to be successful in ways that I wouldn't have been if I hadn't been confident, if I hadn't
Hmm.
been
Hmm.
able to kind of ground myself. Even like, this is crazy. Even like Mario Party games, right? I'm very competitive.
Oh,
We'll play Mario
nice.
Party, and I'll
Fun.
and I'll think like if it's an intense game, I'm like, all right, I will, I'm winning, And then
Yeah.
what's the mile runner where he's like, I'm winning, and then I have won when he's finishing up his last lap. If I don't know if you've ever
Oh,
seen that example, right?
no, that's
And
funny
so
though. Yeah, that's good.
the positive language, I mean, it is a life skill. It's something
Mhm.
that you're going to have to encounter every day. You're going to face adversity almost every single day. So you have to have those skills to be successful.
Oh, I agree. That's funny because I did like a keynote talk, and I've never done that before. And I was in front of like a huge high school, and I was so nervous. And I was like, I took a second, and I was like, wait a second. I need to like apply the skills I teach athletes these things all the time. Like I need to take a deep breath, and then I started repeating like I am a good presenter. I am a good presenter. And I just kept doing that until my heart rate went down, and like my shoulders weren't so tense like up in my neck. And it actually, it worked. So I think that's something like, it's just and that was a life situation. So I tell my athletes those stories just to try and relate to them or relate with them, to be like, hey, you know what, I may not be playing your sport and I don't get what it's like maybe in your shoes on the court, but I can tell you I've definitely been in other situations in my own life where these skills have come in handy and they have been effective, and I'm really glad that I was glad that I had them.
I guess when you look at it from the realm of the sports performance team too, you look at strength and conditioning, you look at athletic
Hmm.
training, and then you look
Yeah.
at dietitians and sports psychology. I feel like that's kind of the hierarchy that there is
Yeah.
now from a number of peer positions. Probably athletic training before strength and conditioning would be the most amount of positions. But as the field has grown, strength and conditioning was seen as you're going to gain weight and you're going to get slower. And then obviously that's now turned into an area where I can base my whole career off of it.
Hmm.
And then dietitians, we're fighting to get more than just one for an entire Olympic department. And then same for
Hmm.
sports psych. Here we have one for football and the Olympic side. But
Hmm.
if we talk about athletes and we talk about really caring about their development, and especially from a standpoint, if you look at most of these athletes are not going to be professional players. They're going to
Yeah.
enter the
True.
real world, quote unquote, right after school. So it should match the number of positions that are the same for strength coaches and same for athletic
Hmm.
trainers because it's just as valuable.
I agree with you there for sure. And I think, like, especially from the strength and conditioning side, I think it's such an important, every piece of the puzzle is important. But that to me, and maybe that's how I look at all of this stuff. Like, that's the stuff, like our fields, right? Nutrition, strength and conditioning, mental performance, athletic training. Those are to me the things, like, if you're doing it right, and we're figuring out ways to kind of collaborate with coaches and those teams, and that to me, those are the things that set you apart in the long run. Because I think at some point, and I'd say at the college level for sure, maybe, probably even high school, everybody becomes really good at their sport. And it's hard to kind of figure out, okay, what's going to separate me. And I think it's these pieces of the puzzle that when you can get them going and you can put them together, that's the stuff that I think separates you. It's not like everybody can throw the ball well, right? In college or whatever you're doing. But maybe not everybody's, taking strength and conditioning seriously, or working with a mental performance coach, or, thinking about their nutrition and why that's so important. So I always tell athletes that, I'm like, do those things, right? Make it so that, like, that's the stuff that sets you apart, because you're already physically good, right? You're good at your sport, but, like, what else can you do to really kind of, like, push the bar higher?
I always tell the athletes that we work with here, like, look at what professionals do,
Yeah.
and then and look at kind of what you would consider to be lower tier professional athletes as well. Like those are
Hmm.
the ones who are doing all these things that have elevated them to the next level. They may not have the talent necessarily to be, a LeBron James, right? But they do have the ability to work on all these things and then allow them to stay at that professional level for a longer time. I always use the example of Josh McCown 100% of the time. And I'm sure I've done it on this podcast before, right? But a quarterback who, never really, he started a couple years, but ultimately was not known as an elite quarterback, but was in the NFL for over a decade because of how he prepared his body and how he prepared his mind and how he approached, being a professional. It's like
Yeah.
it's not just about getting to the professional ranks; it's about maintaining
Yeah.
your eligibility to be there, and that's going to
Hmm.
be exactly like the things you just mentioned.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, we talk about all athletes, working with a mental performance consultant, but ultimately, what are some things that you wish more athletes understood about CMPCs?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Now, I'll preface my response with, I think that we are moving in the right direction. Like, I think that over the last, what, 5, 10 years, it's grown so much, our field. And we can just see that in terms of, like, people pursuing these master's degrees and beyond. And we're seeing sports teams now hire mental performance coaches and athletic departments. And I think that's great. So I do want to just say that I think we're moving in the right direction. I think the biggest thing that I would want athletes to know about mental performance coaches, would be that it's not, like, I think a common myth with this stuff is that it's like, I only go talk to someone if I have a problem, or there's something, like, psychologically wrong with me, or if I go speak with a mental performance coach, that means that I'm weak. And I know that perspective, and I actually look at it totally different, of course. So I think of it more as, I take a strengths based approach to this stuff, and I kind of mentioned that earlier, where to me it's not about, like, when I'm working with an athlete, or like in an initial session, I'm not going and saying, hey, what are all the things that you're really bad at, or, like, what are your problems, what are your, I don't even like using that language, like, what are your problems or issues. I instead kind of look at that as, like, hey, we start with the strengths. What are the things you feel really good about out there? And maybe what are those areas then that you'd love to build on, that are going to make you an even better athlete than you already are now? So that to me is how I view mental performance coaching, as in, it's an enhancer, right? It's not something, like, it's not a problem, or it's not something we need to fix. It's just something that I think that once we get working on those skills, or those attributes like confidence or focus, then it's going to enhance your overall sport experience. So I'd say that that would be probably the biggest thing I'd want athletes to understand more, that it's okay to go talk to someone. And I think, again, it's benefiting you, right, in the long run. You're learning skills that aren't just going to be applied in the sport context. You're going to be able to, like I said earlier, take those with you wherever you go.
Well, it'd be the approach of only going to see the athletic trainer when you're injured, instead of doing maintenance recovery. There's a
Yeah,
lot that
you're
you can get
correct.
out of it. How do you break that barrier for athletes who may see going to talk with somebody or working with a mental performance consultant as weak?
Yeah, I think I use examples a lot. So I love to use, like, success stories, or, I love to pull, like you mentioned, professional athletes. I love to pull a professional athlete example of someone working with them with a mental performance coach, because I think that highlights, okay, this person got to the highest level and they're open to working with a mental coach because they know it's an important part of their development. Even at that professional level, like, you've reached the peak, right? But you're still constantly working to maintain and enhance these different areas. So I usually do that. And then also, like I said before, I just think language is really important. Like how you speak to an athlete, and how you kind of frame it. So, like I said, that first session with an athlete is so important to be able to, like, highlight that strengths-based approach and really make them feel good. Like, I think sometimes athletes may go into that feeling like, oh God, I'm going to get ripped apart right now. And I'm going to just have to talk about all the things that I suck at. And I'm like, no, like, I don't even really spend that much time in an initial session with an athlete talking about, like, hey, what's our plan? I'm thinking more like, hey, what are the things you're really good at, and tell me about your strengths, and let's dig into those, because that's your foundation. And then once we hit on those strengths and they're like, oh, like, that's not bad, I got to talk about the things I'm good at, and what I enjoy, then we'll get into, again, like, okay, what are some things you and I could work on together, and how can I support you? Right. So, and the language piece, like I said, is huge. It's not a problem. It's not a weakness. It's not an issue. So I'm really careful just with the way I speak, to an athlete about this stuff.
How could, obviously with this being a strength and conditioning podcast, how could strength coaches best support that positive environment towards sports psych?
Yeah, I think just simply talking about it, how making it a point, like in a workout, or when I and you know what, I think, the cool thing with and maybe you can tell me if I'm off on this, but, like, for a strength and conditioning coach, you're around the athletes a lot, right? So I feel like that's a perfect, I mean, you have access. So for someone like me, I don't really, unless someone seeks me out, right? And especially in my private practice, I'm not, like, with an athlete, or I'm not with teams, like, every single day. So I think, like, you have that opportunity, you have the open lines of communication just to talk about, like, hey, you know what, mindset matters, or just throw in little tidbits there, like, hey, and it doesn't have to be like, hey, go talk to a mental performance coach. It's like, whenever you deliver, your workout, and you're talking about making sure that we have a good attitude. Like, it's just little things. I think dropping hints that, like, this stuff matters, and it's going to have an impact on your performance. How you motivate kids, I don't know, how you build their confidence. So I'd just say, like, just simply making it a point to talk about it.
Well, I think you're 100% correct. We spend a lot of time with the athletes, and that's
Yeah.
what I was trying to get the coaches on the Zoom last night to understand as well. Is if you look at the summer breakdown for summer training before we get into our official hours, it's 4 and 4. It's 4 hours
Mm,
in the weight room, and it's 4 hours on the court. And
mm,
then from the court perspective, it's typically going to be where I've been, it's been 2 hours with your specific coach. So maybe your post player, you'll be with your coach who you're assigned to, and then it's going to be 2 hours of team practice as well. And so, it really, from a standpoint of who's spending the most time with one specific coach, it's always going to be the strength coach. And
yeah.
so, I think that kind of highlights two things. The first is that that's why there's a need for more positions as a
Yeah.
whole, is because
Yeah.
ultimately it shouldn't be the strength coach kind of dispelling all this information. That's how it is
Mhm.
now. That's how it has to be.
Mhm.
But ultimately, it should be coming from CNPC specifically with that team. I think that would be the optimal model to actually approach that.
Mhm.
And I tried to tell the coaches the same piece too. Is like when something goes wrong on the court, the athletes are going to come see us first. Like we're the first line. It's
Yeah.
we always practice and then lift. And so if
Yeah.
they're pissed off at a coach, if somebody upsets them, they're going to come see us immediately. And so that's where I think ultimately why I wanted to speak with you is strength coaches can be the biggest benefactor or they can be the
Mhm.
biggest distractor from
Mhm.
actually utilizing these resources and helping the sports performance team just because of the amount of face time that we get. Same with our dietitian here. She is only able to speak with him in one-on-one consultations, and
Mhm.
she's got every Olympic team, so she's not very going to be able to stop by practice all the time and talk to them about these things. So I
Yeah.
think when you talk about strength coaches supporting these, it's critical. And
Yeah.
exactly like you just said, you don't have to say, well, you just go see the mental performance consultant,
Mm-mm.
but
Yeah.
you can show them small links to, like, how Kobe approaches games. Kobe
Mm.
uses visualization a ton, right? How
Mhm.
LeBron approaches his mental performance, even just from a basketball standpoint. Like, these things are
Mhm.
are prevalent, and they're a game changer. There's what's going to help you elevate to that next level. So that's where I think strength coaches kind of, the onus is on them to be able to support you.
Yeah, for sure. And I love, like, yeah, just like again the examples, being able to tie those in, or with a basketball team like the Kobe Bryant. He's like one of my favorite just examples for mental performance, because I think he had it, like he understood it and he used it. Like I use him a lot for like perspective on failure and mistakes. I just love it. He's like, if you're not failing, you're not learning.
Mm.
And to me, like hearing that, it's one thing to hear it from me, but it's another thing to like, okay, there's an example. Like I said earlier, it's someone who reached that highest pinnacle of sport. And it sometimes, it is what it is. It means more, right? Sometimes to an athlete to see like, oh, somebody that is doing something that I aspire to do is using this mental performance training, and it's something that has benefited them. So I love the anytime you can use examples, I love that.
Well, and I'm a big Kobe Bryant proponent as well.
Mhm.
And the debate is always Kobe versus LeBron. I think they use their resources in different ways, but
Yeah.
even what I love about how he approaches it, and what I think is so great about sports psych, is it takes things to a deeper level. It doesn't just
Mhm.
silo it into,
Yeah.
it's this or that. It's, well,
Mhm.
maybe it's in the middle, and how can we approach the middle, right? And so
Mhm.
there was a clip of him. They asked the question, "Do you love to win or hate to lose?" And
Mhm.
he goes, "Neither." Like, it's,
Yeah.
I have to stay neutral. Obviously I love the process of winning and I love getting
Yeah.
better, but ultimately, like, for me, it is about the process itself. And so
Mhm.
that's what is so interesting to me about sports psych, is it's something where you can dive further into the middle. You can
Mhm.
understand that everything isn't black and white. That's not how life is. So that's not how sport is going to be either.
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
the end of the day, the result is black and white. You won or you lost, right?
Yeah.
But the process to get there, it's not. And so ultimately,
Mhm.
you have to work with people who can help you dive deeper into that.
Yep. Yep. That's why all these rules are so important. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. We talked about what athletes should understand more. What do you think is something that strength coaches should understand more about NPCs?
You know what? I'm gonna take this question. I was thinking about this. I don't want to say like understand more. I think maybe just like having, like I said before, I go back to the idea of like examples, and maybe just understanding from like a mental standpoint, like based on the teams you all are working with, what are your strength areas and what are your areas for growth from a mental standpoint. I feel like if a strength coach can pick up on that, then that way you're able to then maybe tailor your examples better in the weight room, or in whatever workout you're doing. And I feel like common, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, just like common ones that I was thinking of just attribute wise. I think motivation is a big one, how you motivate in the weight room. And what you just mentioned about like a process focus, I think that's huge. I think, and that's for any athlete. I think a lot of times we get caught up in the result, whether it's the win or the loss, or like in the weight room, like, hey, did I get stronger? Right? Am I lifting more, or am I faster? And of course, those things are important. Results matter. I would never tell an athlete that a result doesn't matter. It does, right? Especially at this level. But I think sometimes we forget process. And I think as a strength coach, process is so important, where it's like those little things that you're doing, and the way in which you're challenging yourself. Or, again, what is your process of achievement? What does that look like? Again, that's the stuff that I think puts you on the path to get to the outcomes you want. So I'd say like I think of it more as just like being able to kind of recognize what your athlete needs, whether that's like the motivation piece, maybe the process focus, maybe it's confidence. I think maybe sometimes the athletes, kids lack confidence there, and then being able to maybe tailor examples to that attribute. And I'm not saying like we have to apply skills, or like you have to have like all these, you know what I mean? Like that's, I just think being able to talk about it, or maybe having an example in your back pocket of like, hey, what would I do if like my athlete is lacking confidence in the weight room? What's one thing I could say to them, or what's one thing I can maybe ask them, to help kind of open up that conversation, or help kind of build them up if needed. So that's kind of my thoughts.
No, I think that's fantastic. And, when you speak of motivation, it just kind of brings me back to my recruiting speech, right? And what we tell our athletes when they first come in
Mhm.
here, because I think that's when I have to think the most about what I do, is when I have to dispel it in 15 minutes to somebody, to convince them that they should come and be a part of this program. But ultimately, how I see the weight room is you're not truly invested within weightlifting, right?
Mhm.
If you look at the
Mhm.
motivation scale, right? You're not going to be on complete intrinsic motivation, and for it's very rare for athletes to just love lifting weights and just love
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
actual weightlifting itself. But they could be in a process where they understand that lifting weights will help them.
Mhm.
With what they do love, which is playing basketball, playing soccer, whatever the sport may be.
Mhm.
And so I take it from approach and just tell them, like, you're going to be with me 4 times per week. If you want to get
Mhm.
extra work in, we'll probably see each other 6 times per week. And
Mhm.
so ultimately, my job is to make sure that you don't lose sight of stacking those days and understanding
Mhm.
that you can't waste a lift just because you want to get through it, or because you're
Mhm.
thinking about basketball practice or something, is affecting your process of getting better. Because ultimately, if you start missing those days, that's when you're not going to see the results the most. So I think
Mhm.
from a motivation standpoint, that's what I focus on the most with our athletes
Mhm.
is a little bit staying neutral, not getting too high and
Yeah.
trying to just go for a PR every single day, but then also not getting too low and not loving the process of getting better. Because ultimately, I
Mhm.
think that's the biggest link between the weight room and the court is
Yeah.
you can see yourself getting better. You can see the process of being
Yeah.
better, being stronger. And so I think that's why I try to focus on motivation the most.
I love that. Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. My husband's a college hockey coach, so we have these conversations a lot, and he is such a big proponent of strength and conditioning coaches because he just knows how important it is. We've talked about that actually recently, just about like after like a long game weekend or like a series, coming back into the weight room on a Monday. He's like, that is such an important role for the strength and conditioning coach to be able to like get those kids, excited in some way about what they're about to do, because a lot of times that's difficult. You come off a tough weekend, you're feeling sore, you're injured, or maybe, or just in discomfort, and then you go into the weight room. So I think like from a motivational standpoint, like how do you get that going for kids, or even not even like making them like super excited, just like you said, it's like how do we kind of have a balance and like knowing like we want to be a part of the process and it's important. I don't know, I think that's so interesting. So
Well, it just immediately makes me think of one time with our women's basketball team. They went out first game of the year, traveled
mhm,
to Charlotte, and so
mhm.
it's a higher level conference.
Yeah.
We didn't know what we had. You never know what you didn't never know what your team is made of until you hit your final game of
Mhm.
the season.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
ultimately we were playing our first game, just try and figure out exactly what this season's going to be about. And they go to, I think it's triple overtime in the first game of the season, and then lose on last second.
yeah,
One of our players got the ball stolen from her, just made a small error that just ended up,
yeah.
obviously that specific error is not what lost us the game. But
Mhm.
I'll never forget, on that Monday they came back into the weight room and it was just like, like they all came in and
Yeah.
super sad, and it was just like, all right, like it's ultimately this can't, do you want us to define us, this,
Yeah.
specific game to define the rest of our season or not? Because,
Mhm.
it would have been really cool for us to start off and, win a triple overtime game against a team that was better than us. But if we hang our hats on that for the rest of the season, then we're
Mhm.
not going to be very successful either. So I
No.
think the neutral mindset is what's helped me the most. And
Mhm.
specifically with like, I love It Takes What It Takes. That's my favorite sports
Yeah,
psych book. And so that's why I try to
yeah.
dispel to the athletes a ton.
Oh, I love that. You know what? Bringing up neutral mindset, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I've been moving away from this. I think like I always talk, well, we always say like having a positive attitude. It's really important. What's your thoughts on that? I guess like in the weight room, like I'm kind of moving away from positivity, and I've moved more towards like I try to use like productive attitude or productive mindset or like that neutral mindset. Cause I think sometimes for an athlete, like I don't think it's reality to be like, oh, you always have to be positive and you have to be like, even when something sucks, right? Like, and it's hard. You don't have to be like, it's probably not reality to be like, oh, this is great. This is amazing. I love this. You know what I mean? It's almost like fake in a way or not authentic. So I've been moving away from that and term and more towards like the productive or neutral. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's such an interesting balance, right? Because
Yeah.
ultimately,
Yeah.
like I tell them all the time, your thoughts become your beliefs, which become your actions. And
Yes.
so it is
Yes.
about being positive, so that eventually you'll trick yourself into being positive. But
Mhm.
it's just not, like you said, it's not real.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
they could have had an argument with their significant other in the morning and then go to
Mhm.
practice and not have had a great practice. And now they're going to
No.
come in, and for me to be like, no, dude, you should be stoked that I like, the one thing that really bothers me is like it's not a have to, you get to,
Yeah,
and I
get to
think
want
I was
to.
speaking with somebody else about this. Maybe he was on a podcast here previously, but
Yeah.
like, yeah, sometimes you have to, it's like, like
No,
sometimes if we're being
true.
real, you have to.
Yeah.
And so I think with the neutral mindset, like how I just, approach it is I kind of tell them about the people who are significantly, or consistently the best are the ones who just take the monotonous or take the boring, and they
Mhm.
are intentional with it. And that's what I try to
Intention, yeah.
tell them a lot is try to
Mhm.
be intentional with what you're doing. I get it. Like,
Mhm.
there's sometimes you come in here and we got heavy squats today, and I totally understand it. Like, I don't want to do my heavy squats and I don't even have practice, but
Yeah.
ultimately, can you be intentional with it? And can you understand that this is still an outcome that will come from, a positive workout, right? So
Mhm.
maybe it's not positivity from a mental standpoint, but it is
Yeah.
positive from a standpoint of we are adding to what we're ultimately
Yeah.
trying to achieve.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, for sure. There's definitely a balance to it, and it's interesting. I don't even know that I found the balance, but I think it's a constant work in progress for sure.
Yeah. And that's honestly, that's one of the reasons I kind of moved away from football, right? Is
Yeah.
because in football, it's kind of this like it's the expectations you're screaming and you're yelling and you're super high energy all the time. And like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I could tell sometimes, like when I'm being assistant, a GA, whatever, like these
Mhm.
guys are like, dude, get out of my face. Like, I'm just not like this. I'm not responding to this today.
Yeah.
And so that's why I like basketball so much, is because you get to learn these people really individually. And then you get
Yeah.
to understand what's the best way to coach them. And then I can also see immediately as they come in the door, like, is this guy
Mhm.
pissed off today? Does he really not want to be here? So maybe I'll approach it just a little bit differently.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, the football. And then working with so many, I assume that's such a huge team too. Like just
Yeah.
like so many personalities and so many. That's what I think it's so in general, like doing our jobs, it's so important to be able to, and I think it's a difficult thing, right? It's a challenge. You have to, I think like what you talked about at the beginning of this podcast, the importance of relationships and like building trust and um like being able to tailor this stuff to the individual. I think that's also the what goes a really long way. Like I said before, like when you can kind of connect with someone on a deeper level and really get and understand what they need, that's whenever I think we make so much progress, right? Where it's not just this like one size fits all, because it's just not. I don't
Mhm.
think for anything that we do, right? Mental performance, strength and conditioning, nutrition. So I think that's also something I want athletes to recognize too. It's not like we just slap on a positive attitude and mindset and everything's going to be good, right? Maybe for you, it's hey, you do need the motivational self talk. Whereas maybe another athlete, they're going to benefit more from instructional, where it's more so cueing them to kind of execute. And I think that's the fun part of it as a coach. Like you get to be able to do you get to do that if you choose to. And I think that's what makes the experience so much better in the long run whenever you do choose to, individualize it and really get to know those athletes and build that relationship with them.
Yeah, one of the toughest lessons I had to learn was with my fiance, right? Because when
Yeah.
we were first started dating, we lifted together, and I was trying to coach her like, kind of what
Uh-huh.
my initial coaching style was. So a little
Yeah.
bit more tough, like, and I found out really quickly after she didn't lift with me for like a year that that's not how you can approach it. Everybody has to be individualized, and they have to
Yeah.
go about it differently. And again, that's why I do fight for more positions for, specifically your
Mhm.
profession and dietitians, because you have to understand how to
Yeah.
talk with these people and how they're going to receive this language. Like, I can kind of give people warnings sometimes and say, hey, like, I wouldn't really be try to give a ton of constructive feedback right away,
Mm.
because that's somebody
Yeah.
who kind of puts their walls up
Put 'em
immediately.
low.
But
Yeah.
if you are with them every day, you understand that concept way more, and you're
Mhm.
in your way more effective as a performance consultant as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. That's funny. Are you guys lifting again to now or
No, yeah, we're lifting together now. Yep, we lifted together today, and then we're gonna
figured
go
it out?
tomorrow too. Yeah, we're back now. Yeah, I've learned to be really positive. I think she is probably the one person who you'll have to be positive with every single time and
Yeah,
keep her
hey,
positive.
and
Yeah.
that's it though. You figure that out and then you know what works, right? So
Absolutely. One thing that I was really curious about, and I think this becomes the job of the strength coach a lot of the time, right? And
mhm,
it's this kind of idea of mental toughness, and I don't
mhm,
think there's a solid definition for it. I think it's every single way you can possibly look at it. It's a bunch of
yeah,
different things that go into one kind of umbrella of the mental toughness piece. How,
mhm.
how would you define mental toughness?
Yeah, I agree with you. As I was thinking about that definition, I was like, man, there's just so many ways to define it, and there's so much that goes into it. Honestly, like I keep it pretty broad. Like I think it's a culmination of our mental performance attributes, and that culmination like creates the toughness, or like that mental toughness that we seek in sport, right? Or just in general as people. So yeah, I think it's a culmination of like our attributes that we would, and I think common ones, right? At least maybe the ones that I see a lot with the athletes I'm working with. I think it's being confident. Like I think knowing that you can do something successfully. And I honestly, I kind of hate it sometimes. Like I don't know. I think confidence is a buzzword a lot in athletics. Like coaches, and we throw it around a lot, or you got to be confident, believe in yourself, you got this, trust, right? But to me, I don't know how much that really tells an athlete. I'm like, well, yeah, like if you, obviously everybody wants to be confident, but like how do we do that? Right? What are the actions? Like I always say, confidence is something you do, not just something you get. I stole that from a podcast too, so I give credit where I listen to it. But I think something like that, right? Like confidence, buzzword, right? But learning then how we do it, I think that's a part of mental toughness. I think like being resilient is a part of mental toughness. I think and resilient is really hard to define too. I've actually been looking more into this, or trying to learn more about resilience. And I've kind of learned that it's not so much about like in the moment, like how are we, I guess, what are you doing to get over the obstacle? I think resilience is more about preparing for the obstacle. So, like, if you're a resilient athlete, you're prepared for any setback or obstacle you're going to face because you have the skills necessary to address it. So, to me, it's more about being proactive rather than reactive. And that to me kind of represents being a mentally tough athlete. I think being able to focus. So I think I could go on and on, but like focusing in the moment, being present, and not being stuck in the past, not worrying so much about the future of something that's not happening. Like, what is your ability to be kind of where your feet are right now? So those are three that I think kind of make up, to me, like ones that I see a lot with the athletes I work with, that I think make up like a mentally tough athlete. Although, like, again, I don't think that's surely not like that's not the only, those aren't the only ones, but I just feel like some of those come up often that I think kind of represent that.
I agree. It's just such a blend, right? And I can think of a million
Yeah.
different things that, I can think of specific examples. Like to me, when I think about mental toughness, I think about halftime. Like
Mhm.
what does halftime look
Yeah.
like, especially
Yeah.
if you're down, right? And
Yeah.
now, like, I remember we played a game and we were down like 25 at halftime. And it
Yeah.
was, everybody's kind of dejected. And all I'm thinking in my head is
Yeah.
like, well, if they outscored us by 25 points in the first half, we can do the same thing in the second half. Like it's
Exactly.
not,
That's the attitude. Yeah.
we have the exact same amount of time. Uh, but when you talk about confidence, and I think it ties into the preparation aspect that you're talking about
Mhm.
too. I
Does.
think your confidence comes from your preparation.
For sure.
Ultimately, when we talk about conditioning, I think that's kind of where it comes out the most to me, is
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
you know that you've done the conditioning work to be in the physical shape that you need to be in for the game. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
maybe you hit a tough stretch where we didn't get a foul or anything for a significantly long time. We played eight
Yeah.
straight game minutes, and you're exhausted. So then, are you confident enough in your preparation to know that you're going to recover, and then
Mhm.
you'll
Mhm.
be actually still able to perform instead of just saying, "Man, I'm gassed and I'm tapping out." Right?
Yeah.
I think those things make a difference.
Oh yeah, for sure. Preparation creates confidence. Yes, always. And I think that's what, I think that's really important for athletes to understand. You can use that, right? It's a confidence source. You can lean on it, but it never lies. So that's always one thing I'm like, hey, you know what? Make sure you're checking your boxes, because when you do get to that competition, or you get to halftime and you're down by 25, and you need to rely on your preparation and the things that you've done to check the boxes, it will not lie to you. So if you did it, great. That's going to be really helpful. But if you didn't, then that's where I'm going to be concerned, because it's not going to be there, right? And that confidence then may not be there for you in that moment to handle it how you want. So I think that's so important.
That's something I had to learn really early on in my career, right? Is I'd be so anxious about, are we doing the right program? Are we doing
Yeah, yeah.
exactly what we need? And then as soon as I actually researched things more and I,
Mhm.
spent the time learning about it, I felt way more confident about it. Like
Yeah,
conditioning, programming conditioning used to scare the hell out of me. Like I would
yeah,
just,
yeah,
so much I like almost wouldn't even touch it. Like I just
yeah,
would be terrified that we're not in a good spot, right? And then ultimately, the more resources I used and
yeah,
the more people I called, it was like all of a sudden it was just a non-issue. So the
yeah.
preparation piece to me really drives a lot of that. It's do you have the mental toughness to spend the time to actually prepare, and then that will just translate to confidence down the road.
Mhm, mhm.
In
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, we talked about not being overly positive, right? But I do always like to kinda end on a positive note.
Oh, yeah.
What's your favorite part of your job?
Yeah. Oh, I love ending on this is good. Ending on a positive note. Honestly, I just love, being able to connect with athletes, and it's been really cool experience for me. I never thought it was something I guess I just never knew that I guess that I had that opportunity to be able to reach people, like, from all over the country and all different sports with all different needs and wants and goals, and to me, like, just whenever you see my favorite part probably would be, like, in a session or after you've been working with someone for a decent amount of time and you've been consistent and they're putting in the work, it's awesome to see the light bulb moment, or like even just the simple, like they come back into a session after a game and they're like, oh my gosh, I was able to do it. Right. Like I was able to self regulate on my own and like handle that situation or respond with confidence or like focus my attention or redirect it. That's my favorite part of my job. Because then I know like I'm doing something right. And I always say that at the beginning of my work with an athlete. Hey, my goal for you is I don't want us to have to do these sessions, right? Like I want you to get to a point where you do not need me at all, right? I want you to be able to get to a point where you step on the field or the court or in the swimming pool and you're going to be able to self-regulate this stuff on your own. And whenever that does happen, that's the best feeling because then you're like, oh, good. And they did it. And that's what I always say that. They're like, oh my gosh, you helped me so much. And I'm like, yeah, like I'm supporting you. But like at the end of the day, you have to remember you put in this work. Like you did it. That's on you. You own it, and that's awesome. And I like to celebrate that. So
I say the exact same thing all the time, right? And especially when they talk about workout programs or whatever, they're like, "Oh, well, you're the one who made me do the workouts," or something like that. And it's like, dude, I
yeah,
just wrote the program. Like, you
exactly.
could have gone through the motions. You're
Yep.
the one who determined exactly
Yep.
what you get out of this. And so
Mhm.
that's such a cool piece is when you see everything kind of connect and then them actually be successful because you know how bad they want it,
Yes.
and you know how bad, uh, how long they've wanted it to. And
Mhm.
so just to
Yeah.
see your specific field aid them and help them out, and then when you look at it from a holistic standpoint, how much each of our specific puzzle pieces can come together, then
Mhm.
that's where you can see something truly special.
I know, that's the best. Yep, when the puzzle pieces come together, it's a good feeling because usually it puts you in a better position to have success overall as a team, individually, so I love it.
Yeah, there's a reason we get paid, right? That's kind of
Yeah,
always what I say. Like sometimes
true.
I can be like, well, how much of a difference am I making? Then I'm like, well, this is my full time job, so there's a reason I'm getting paid. So
Yeah,
obviously, there's something that we can do to kind of help this out.
yeah, definitely. Very true.
Yeah. Which funny sidebar, we went to Ireland and they just do not have strength and conditioning or the sports are just not to that level there. And so I remember there was a rugby player and he was like, what do you do in America? And I was like, I'm a strength and conditioning coach. He's like, so you're a personal trainer? And I was like, no, like
Yeah,
I work for colleges. And he was like, you get
yeah.
paid like full time? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, you don't work any other jobs. And I'm like, no, dude. Like, he's just, his mind was
Yeah,
blown,
yeah,
and
yeah.
he's like, so how many strength coaches are there? And I was like, thousands, like way more than you could possibly think. And he just lost his mind. So it was funny to think about the different
Yeah.
culture.
Oh, that's
But
hilarious. Yeah, I'm sure I wonder what he'd think of a mental coach. He'd be like, "Huh? What?"
oh, I lose his mind. I think I
Yeah,
think how they approach it is just having a pint at the end of the day. That seems to be how they approach
having
any
fun. Fun is
struggles.
the
Yeah,
forefront. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much, first of all, for coming on. I really enjoyed our conversation. I know that the listeners have as well. If anybody wanted to reach out to you or wanted to work with you in any capacity, what would be the best way to do so?
Yeah, yeah. We can email me at the Wright Mindset LLC at gmail.com. So that's WRIGHT. It's a play on my name. Or visit my website. So it's the same, the Right Mindset LLC.com. That would be a perfect way to reach me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Emily. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Connor. Thanks for having me. This was awesome. Thank you again.
Absolutely.